I wanted to get as in many people's hands and as people to see it as possible and help out people. And there's also, like I said, there's a huge need for landlords to understand Section 8 and what it is.
Mhm.
Because for me, just like stability, I think is the most important thing in a kid's life and even an adult's life is stability. And I get to provide stability in housing for people that really don't have a ton of other stability. My normal tenant, I would say across my portfolio is a single mom with 1 to 3 kids. So I feel really good that I get to provide stability in housing for those kids so that they know where they're going every day when they get off the school bus, which is why I put the program together. That's why it's called Section 8 Done, because if you do it right, it can be very lucrative and you can help a lot of people.
This is the Fit Investor Podcast, where we talk about how to live a more holistic life of being fit, not only financially, but physically and faithfully. We'll be joined by experts in all these areas to share their experiences and actionable and practical tips so that you can be a fit investor too. So now let's join our hosts, Cale Delaney and Brenna Carls. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Fit Investor. I'm your host, Cale Delaney. And today we're joined by Mr. Section 8 Done Right, Mr. Mike Curadossi. And he's a 37-year-old seasoned real estate investor with over a decade of experience in the industry. His journey began back in 2013 with a single property flip, and since then he's built an impressive portfolio of 72 rental units across Massachusetts, along the South Shore and Cape Cod. As a devoted husband and father of 3, Mike balances his family life with a thriving real estate career. His current portfolio is valued at approximately $22 million, with a net worth surpassing $8 million and monthly cash flow of over $50,000. Mike specializes in acquiring quality properties in desirable areas and renting them out to Section 8 tenants, a strategy that has proven highly successful. Recently, he's channeled his expertise into creating a comprehensive course designed to guide others in navigating this niche market, which we're going to explore and deep dive into today. So with that, Mike, welcome to the Fit Investor.
Thank you. And thanks for that introduction. It sounds good. It makes you sound important.
No, it's perfect. So ChatGPT does wonders.
Yeah, I know. You're gonna have to send that to me. That was pretty good.
So yeah, Mike, this, like you just mentioned, this is your first podcast here. And so I'm excited to get your story out there a little bit because you have a really good story and your niche kind of flies under the radar as well as to what you do in real estate. So I think a lot of people are going to identify and be intrigued with this. Why don't you just take us back and tell us who Mike is?
Yeah, so I grew up in Massachusetts. I went to college at UMass Amherst, got a degree in landscape architecture, and I graduated in 2009. Out of school, I could not find a job anywhere because the economy wasn't in great conditions. So I started my own business. So I picked up the Yellow Pages and called every landscape company in the Yellow Pages asking if they needed a landscape designer. So I grew that business a little bit. And as that business grew, so did my expenses. So never really was flush with additional cash with that business. But I realized that I was working, the hours I worked had a direct correlation with how much money I made, right? There's a certain peak and level to that without going out and trying to have the biggest landscape architecture company in Massachusetts. That was never really my goal. So I was always into the flip this house, flip that house shows growing up. And I knew I wanted to get into real estate. So I started reading a ton of books and making my own spreadsheets. And then I went to a real estate meetup. And at that meetup, I was nervous. I almost didn't go in. So I was like, I don't know anything and I'm going to look like an idiot and have all those negative thoughts in your head. And I just eventually, I'm just going to go. So I went in and I ended up meeting my hard money lender that I've used for a long time, who's a really good friend of mine. His name's Elliot. And I also met a realtor there who was investing in real estate himself. He was buying lower end properties, renovating them, and then selling them. And I realized talking with him that I was like, hey, I got to latch on to this guy as much as possible. So I did. And that led me to the first flip that I had. So I went in, I flipped the property. It was the most stressful 6 months of my life. I had no money. So I just racked everything on credit cards. My wife and I moved out of the $1,200 a month house we were renting into the flip when it was almost finished because I couldn't afford to. I needed that 1,200 bucks. So we moved in there. It sold relatively fast and I made 60 grand. And I was like, holy cow, this is the best. I got to keep doing this. But Then I ended up taking that 60 grand. I bought 2 condos because I wanted to get into rental property. That was always where I saw myself going. I wanted to replace my landscape architecture income and move somewhere with better climate. So I bought those 2 condos, and then tax season came and I realized that I had to pay taxes on the gain. I thought since I made 60 grand and spent 60 grand, like it washes and I'm good. But that's not how it works. So I was in $20,000 worth of debt with the government and they charge you interest. And I spent a lot of the following year just paying that off. And I just kept buying properties. I was buying REOs listed on the MLS, renovating them. And I taught myself the BRRRR method along the way, which is rehab, buy, rehab, refinance, repeat. I probably forgot one of the R's there. There's too many in there.
Yeah. Buy,
Yeah.
rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. So I taught myself that model before it was the catchy phrase and readily available as it is now. And that's just what I started doing because I was like, I don't want to flip houses. That's a job. I have a job. I want to buy rental properties and have a net worth and live off my rental income. So I was buying one at a time. And now I've went from single families to small multifamilies to now over the past 30 days, I just bought 2 8-unit buildings over $4 million of real estate. So it took me some time to get there, but now I'm doing something a little bit different. And then I choose to rent it to Section 8 tenants. We can get into that a little bit more, but that's my story in real estate and how I got here today. I retired it. I'm 37. I was able to live off my rental income at 35. We moved from Massachusetts to Jupiter, Florida. And now I choose to work when I want to work, which is great. One day at a time, one property at a time. And eventually you look up, it's 10 years later and you're living the life you always wanted to.
Yeah. It is pretty incredible, honestly, when you take a look back, like if you've taken that risk and gone down that journey and see how relatively quickly things can change. When you're in it, it seems like it's taken forever. But then once you look back, you're like, wow, actually, that's even if it's 5 years or 10 years, that's a relatively short period of time to drastically change your life. Whereas most people work a 40, 50-year career and never get to financial freedom. So yeah, it's always pretty incredible. And it is hard to be, I think, I don't know, farsighted or long-sighted. I don't know what the proper word would be when you're getting into it, because we all want that instant gratification. We want to immediately own 100 units and $50,000 in passive income, right? Don't necessarily want to take the steps or the time to get there. But when you do, if you do, and you look back, you see how quickly things can actually change and how quickly you can get going. Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that some more. But I want to take it back a little bit first, because I know we were chatting offline a little bit though about into your background and kind of some of the stories of your upbringing and your relationship with your father and how that kind of ties into not only perhaps the real estate journey and what's got you to where you are now, but also in terms of physical fitness and your ideas and your why and being a father. So why don't you take us back again a little bit and let's go through that story.
Yeah. Growing up, I feel your father's your hero. And mine was, he was in good shape and he was an athlete and he was the person I wanted to aspire to be. And there became a day where all of a sudden he wasn't my hero anymore, which is hard. I was in 3rd grade and but he got hurt at work. And this was the time during like the opioid pandemic. So his doctor prescribed him this new miracle drug, Oxycontin, and his life spiraled but it was pretty bad and it ruined our family's life and everything. And at the time, like there's a lot of information about it now, but at the time it's like, what is going on? What's happening? I was let down a lot in my life. So for me, and it's motivated me, especially now having kids, right? Like I look back at those experiences and now I've thought a lot about what like success is, right? And success for me is waking up every day and being my kid's hero, right? Because I don't want my kids to ever know what it's like to have me not be their hero anymore. Everything I do on a day-to-day basis is tied into that, right? How much do I work? Like, where am I putting my time to? What am I teaching them? How am I treating my wife? How am I treating other people, right? Because kids are sponges and they look at everything. That's really important to me. And now that I can live off my rental income, I ride bikes to school with my daughter every day, right? Like I coach my kids' t-ball team. So it's those experiences for me are more important than anything else. And now I get to go on podcasts like this stuff because I was so motivated to get out of kind of the rat race. It was my own company, be financially free so I could have that time for my kids. Now I'm very grateful for the life that I have, but I wake up every morning with that goal to just be the best person I can for them. And when we live in Florida now, we go up to Massachusetts for a couple months in the summer and I take my kids to my properties. Like I took my son to the closing with me. I want them to see what I do, even at a young age. Cause my daughter, it's funny. She said to me, we first moved there, she's like, Dad, are you ever going to work again? And I was like, that's not what I want you to think of me. No, my dad doesn't work. So I make sure they know what I do and I explain things to them. Yeah, I don't know if I'm rambling on or not here, but yeah, that to me and my father too, like I remember as a kid, like we'd do push-ups together and I look at pictures because that's really he passed away about 7 years ago. And now it's just pictures. And I look at pictures of when he was my age and I was my kid's age and he was in shape. And I look at those pictures and I'm like, I want my kids to look at pictures when they're my age and they have kids and be like, oh, and realize why, hopefully, right? Like they wanted to exercise and work out and having kids and working out and being fit is difficult, right? Especially my kids are 6, 4, and 2. My wife and I had kids pretty quickly, all right in a row. So it's a lot of work. And I know with me, it's like, all right, if I want to work out, I got to get up. I got to get up before everyone else is up or I'm not going to work out. So it's just really important. Like I get up at 5 every morning, I go to the gym and I get home and I have some personal time before it's jumping directly into family time, which is really important for me, for my mental health and getting my day set up and starting ahead, not behind.
hmm Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is pretty huge, and I think it's been made very popular over these past couple of years with the Miracle Morning book and all that stuff. But so what is your routine? You mentioned you get up at 5, you go to the gym, but then what do you do for your personal time or anything else?
Yeah, my personal time is really just like in between sets at the gym, just going through my emails, looking at things and getting set up, going through my calendar, seeing what I have for the day. And my workout routine, I feel like I've been doing the same thing since college. So it's very repetitive, right? One muscle group a day. And
Right.
kind of just, I go 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And then when I get home, my wife goes to the gym and my kids start getting up. So I make them breakfast and then she gets home and we ride bikes to school with my daughter and nothing too specific from like a mental standpoint for me, but I've found that on the days when if I stay up late, like I'm a big Patriots fan, right? Like they used to have a lot of Monday night football games. They don't anymore because they stink. When I'd stay up late on a Sunday or Monday night, like I wouldn't go to the gym next day and I'd wake up and just like, I just don't like how I feel today. I'm not motivated. I'm not accomplishing as much as I do when I get up early. So for me now, like I go to bed when I go to bed. Like nothing is more important than having that time in the morning for myself. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. Um, and I learned that relatively late in life as well. Really, only a few years ago that I changed my routine to start doing the morning and all that stuff. And it really is important to have a little bit of quiet time or whatever it is before the chaos kind of sets in. Because the way you start your day really dictates how everything else is going to go typically. I remember when I was working my regular W-2, I would, before I was married and all that stuff, I wake up as late as I possibly could, which was like 6:15, and then shower, make my protein shake and drink it on the drive in. And it was always just a rush every morning. And that's how the rest of the days always were, just this kind of rush. And then it wasn't until I started down my path and my youngest son was born that I switched to this, morning routine and started getting up early and doing all that stuff. And it definitely does set your day up better, in my opinion, and give you a little bit more clarity and ability to, you know, handle whatever the day is going to bring. So I think
right.
that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, for sure. If we like on weekends, if we ever, I always get up before the kids anyways, but if for some reason I sleep in a little bit and your kids run down and jump in your bed and wake you up, that's really cool for them to jump on your bed. But and then it's, I want this, I need that, I'm hungry. It's just like, when you're like trying to scramble to catch up. For me, as great of a feeling it is, and as blessed as I am to have 3 great kids who are healthy and can run and jump on my bed and wake me up. Every once in a while, that's okay. But if that was an everyday thing for me, like, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Absolutely. You mentioned something which is really important. You mentioned that your goal every day is to be your kid's hero. And you shared a bit what success looks like, but what does, and it may change over time, but what does being a hero for them mean, at least to you?
Honestly, it's being there for them physically and emotionally. Because for me, there were so many struggles that I had when I needed my father and I couldn't go to them. Like I had to learn in life what not to do by watching what he was doing. Like everything he did, I did the opposite. And like for a lack of a better term, like that sucks. That's not what I ever want my kids to have to do. Like I want them to look at me as a role model for them. And that's if they have like when they get home from school and just being there and asking what their day was, they never really tell me, just telling them, hey, when you're ready, I'd love to hear it. And just being able to put my kids to bed every night and just being there and listening to them and hopefully having them knowing that if they ever need anything, I'm here for them. And that's really for me, like I'm not gone traveling all the time. I'm never not there. Like I'm always here. And I didn't have that. So that's why I think it's so important for me to be there for them every day for whatever they need.
And so how did that upbringing and relationship or lack thereof with your father push you or motivate you in terms of getting into the entrepreneurial world or wanting to build something for yourself, get financial freedom? Because I think your background is sadly enough not unique, right? So many people go through similar situations, broken homes, drug addictions, alcohol addictions. And we often, I think the norm usually is that we often get pigeonholed into or perhaps cast our identity on that and thinking that perhaps that's going to be me or that's all there is to look forward to in life. I'm not going to be anything. I don't have the chance. I don't have the opportunity. And it's not until we break out of that mindset that we can really move forward. And so many people get stuck, right? It's, and the real estate world is like the analysis paralysis, right? We just get stuck there. We never move forward. So I'm just curious, obviously you did move forward and you took those negative situations and turned it into a positive. So I'm just curious, was there ever a pivotal moment where kind of the light switch flicked or you just had that mindset shift, or how did you take that and turn it into a positive?
Yeah. So I think for me, like I learned at a young age that I really, if I wanted something done, I gotta like me and my mother have a great relationship. She was amazing. But if I want something done, it's up to me. Like I don't depend on anyone for anything. And that's just how I am. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but if something needs to get done, it's up to me to do it. And for me, like my world's very black and white. Either do you don't. Like we have kids. I used to go to the gym at 5. So I would never go to the gym at 5 now. So it's like, oh, I just won't work out anymore. Or it's like, how can I go to the gym? I can go to the gym if I get up before everyone else. Okay, I'll get up before everyone else. It's very simple in my head. And I think it's like that because I'd always depended on myself to make the right decision. And for me, like, I think a real pivotal moment in my life was like when my father died, we were there like cleaning out his apartment, which is like a horrible thing to do. But I looked in his fridge and there wasn't one thing in his fridge besides like a pack of ketchup. And I was like, how does someone live like this? I looked in his cabinets and there's no food. I didn't know how bad he was struggling. And then he had a little journal there that I read a little of and then couldn't anymore. And so for me, it just goes back to my kids will never know what that feels like. Like they just won't. And for me, like I didn't have kids at the time, but for me, I was like, I'm going to build something like a legacy for my children so that my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids, when they think of who I was, it's only positive. And I hope like I can inspire my great grandchildren. And one day, if my kids take over my properties, they can show their kids, and then my grandkids take over. And who knows if that will happen or not? That for me, it's honestly what drives me every day is to build a legacy for my family because it wasn't gonna like my dad died with nothing. And so like I remember getting called by creditors and everything and people trying to collect on unpaid bills and it's bad. Right. So it's honestly what motivates me. It's just like my like I said, like my kids won't know what that feels like. And even the marriage with my wife. Marriage is hard. You gotta work through things, but she's a great partner in life with me and my children. And we work together to go through whatever difficulties we have and we come out stronger on the other side. And it's really the love we have for each other and also for our kids.
Yeah. And did you grow up with like the typical kind of scarcity mindset when it comes to the relationship with money?
Yeah. For me, like I always thought that like making 60, 70 grand a year was going to get you rich. Oh, like that's all you're going to be rich. And then I realized pretty quickly, especially now with inflation, it's like that. But it's really even now, like not, it's hard when you make that much money to get by. But yeah, I don't know. Money to me, like I always, like my first job was at Dunkin' Donuts. And I remember I'd get tips and I'd count my tips up and I'd have paper and I'd be like, okay, I made this much in tips today. I work this many days a week. I want to buy this car. How much does that car cost? And I'd back everything out of that. And okay, I need 10 grand to buy that car. Okay, this much today. How many days do I have to work? When can I get that? And then I'd mark it on my calendar. Like you have this much money that day. And I'd always like track that, which I guess goes into real estate pretty well now because like when you do the BRRRR strategy and you're buying apartments and you're consistently cycling that money, right? Like any money you have, you put into other properties. So you're always broke, right? And I think you talked about it earlier, being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's why flipping houses is such like a sexy thing and people have doing it because you get that instant gratification. Like when that property sells and you close, you get a check, right? It's yeah, I just made money. And then but the issue is with flipping houses, it's like when the economy crashes, which eventually it will, like you're probably going to lose everything because all your money was either spent or tied up in properties that don't cash flow.
Taxes, like you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to pay 30% of it in tax, 40% in tax. Like, so, you know, I don't know. I don't know, losing my train of thought here, but yeah, I mean, flipping houses is to me a job. And if
I
you're
mean,
going to retire and build wealth, you have to have rentals. You got to make money when you sleep, like rich dad, poor dad, right? You have to have assets to pay for your liabilities. Anything I buy, okay, I want to buy a new house or whatever it is. How much does that cost? How many properties do I need? That's just how my mind works.
yeah. And so that's, again, I wanted to flush that out because again, the norm is, and myself as well, is typically we grow up with a scarcity mentality when it comes to money. And that can be very difficult to break out of. But you find that the vast majority of, in particular, real estate investors have, or much more so have, an abundance mindset when it comes to the relationship with money. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why people who invest in real estate are typically successful, or it's a relatively successful industry, right? Because of that abundance mindset. And you find that people are willing to share their experiences. It's less competitive, not to say there's not some dog eat dog sections of real estate, but overall, I think that the real estate investing community is much more cooperative than competitive. And that abundance mindset really encourages that. But growing up with a scarcity mindset is very difficult to overcome. And it's funny when you mentioned it, made me remember things because I grew up in the Northeast as well. And it's typical everywhere, but just very prominent in small towns and stuff like that, where, yeah, a lot of people in college or after college or high school work the low or the minimum wage jobs, Dunkin' Donuts. My first job was at Kmart as a cashier, which was awful.
Yeah.
Yes. But the funny thing is that you see all these people making these minimum wage jobs and they're driving brand new cars. And it's just that mindset and that mentality with money is what so many people grow up with and get stuck with is how can I make a payment on this next car? Like you were explaining there. And instead of how can I turn my liabilities into assets? How can I recycle my money to make it work for me and grow more? And once you make that mindset switch and get into that kind of abundance mindset and relationship with money, that's when things can really take off. But it's really hard to make that switch. And it's different motivation for everybody. And that's why it's so important to have a why. And you talked about your why with your children and wanting to be a hero and leave a legacy, which is a great why, because that's a strong one. And that's one that will last. All right. So it's just super critical. Anybody getting into that journey or trying to make that switch, having that why is probably the most critical thing I would say.
Yeah. Getting up in the morning and feeling motivated to achieve something.
Right.
It's unfortunately you go to school and you're taught not all the best things. And you read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it's just crazy to me that there's not more personal finance classes and kids aren't being taught in an early age how to manage money and how to accelerate the growth of money, right? You're getting taught in school how to be an employee, basically.
You
And
will.
yeah, and it's just so sideways that it took me until I was like 22 reading Rich Dad Poor Dad to even hear of these concepts after being in school, going to college, and then finally hearing because I chose to read a book.
Yeah. All right. So you took us down kind of the genesis of getting into the real estate a little bit. You started with the flips, and then you bought those couple condos. And how did you eventually discover or make the transition into the Section 8 and small multifamily and now some larger multifamily? Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, so when I was buying single families, I ended up and going back to the abundance mindset and helping other people. At one of the real estate meetups I went to, I met these two guys, and Kyle and Tony, and I taught them basically how the Burr method, right? At the end of the meetup, we went out, I had a piece of paper and I just scribbled everything down. I was showing them how to do it. They asked me questions. So I helped them out, right? I didn't need to do that, but I wanted to help them out. Then probably about a year later, they were starting wholesaling. So they called me and said, "Hey, Mike, I have this property on Oakdale Street in Wareham." And I went to it and it was bad, right? It was like raining through one of the sides of the building. It was covered in mold. And I looked at it, I was like, "What do you want?" And so we ended up working out a deal, and that's how I got this property. So I renovated the whole thing, and then I got applications. Like I just listed on Zillow, Craigslist, and I got application from a woman named Jody, and she's actually still with me today. And she said, "Hey, do you accept Section 8?" And I said, "I don't know what Section 8 is." So she gave me the contact for a housing worker, and I called her housing worker, and I learned about it. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do this." It's a little bit more paperwork upfront, which a lot of landlords don't feel like dealing with. Like, you would be shocked at how many like, when I list a property for rent, the first thing at the top of the headline is, "Do you accept Section 8?" And I say, "Yes, of course I do." And then underneath that, they say, "Wow, thank God you're the first landlord out of like 20 properties that say they accept it." It's why there is a niche and there is a huge need for housing because there's such a bad perception of people with a voucher, right? Which you get into later. But so I bought that property. I rented to her. She's still with me today. I was getting $1,800 a month for rent, and I'm getting 3,675 now. She's still with me. Her tenant portion of rent is directly related to her income, not the rent. And HUD releases fair market rents every year. You can look up online. And then the housing authorities look at the fair market rents, and then they can pay up to 120% of the fair market rent. So this one housing authority pays 120% of what HUD releases as fair market rent. So I just go up to whatever they tell me I can go up to every year. Like I don't set my rents. The government sets my rents. And I just go up to that number, and the housing portion goes up and the tenant portion stays the same unless there's a change in the tenant's income. I started realizing that. And over the years, I'd buy more properties, and I just picked the best person, whoever applied. I wasn't really bullish on Section 8. I learned a little bit and was learning along the way. And when COVID happened, I would say about 60% of my portfolio was Section 8. I had 30-ish units at the time. And I got letters from every single housing authority I work with saying that if my tenant's income changes, to notify them and they'll pick up the difference. So for me, I've always been really safe. Like I've never hit like a big home run deal, buy a flip and make $1 million. Like I've always been very consistently hitting singles and doubles, and that's what I always focused on. So for me, being a safe investor, I looked and I was like, what's the worst thing that can possibly happen? It's a government telling you can't work. What's worse than that for a land? Like aliens invade, or the world of you get hit by a meteor. Like what else is worse? It covered 100% of my downside. And there was also different programs that came out, like a Massachusetts program called Raft, which it helps tenants with first, last security and any back rent. So not only was the housing authority portions increasing, but if something happened with one of my tenants, they could fill out RAF paperwork, and it would take about 3 months to get the rent, but I'd get their tenant portion of rent, which varies. Some tenants pay me zero, and some tenants pay me $1,600 out of their 3,000, right? So it ranges between there. It can change if a tenant has a change in job or they lose their job. So you do have that paperwork coming in that I just updated my property management software. But when that happened for me, like a light bulb went off, and it's like, why would I ever not do this? When I have really an application process that we can go over if you'd like, to get really good people. And for me, HUD released Section 8 tenant stays an average of 8.75 years in a rental, whereas a market tenant stays between 2.5 and 3.
Right.
So in my eyes, a market landlord has to turn their unit 3 times before I'm turning it once. And
Mhm.
tenant turnover is literally I'm turning units right now with a building I just bought. It's cost me like 12, 15 grand to go through and renovate units. Just paint now. It's like insane how much my painters are charging to paint units. It's nuts. I know these units are a little rougher than my units. So it costs me for a 3 bedroom, it's going to cost me about 7, 8 grand to turn a unit with painting, with going in there for a day, maintenance stuff, cleaning, and then you lose a month of rent. So you're going to lose like 9, 10 grand just turning a unit. So for me, if I can not do that for 8.75 years for every tenant, as long as they do a good job going through their application and get good people going in, like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. And yeah, why don't we deep dive into a little bit? And which, first off, actually, you want to just mention you have your course now, the Section 8 done, right?
Yeah, so it's funny. I never thought I'd release a course, and how we met through the Better Life um, program there, and my pod group. When I moved to Florida, I was what's next, and I've always been very goal oriented. My whole life, I've wanted to move to Florida, and I did it. So I was feeling a little lost, and one of my pod mates was, "Dude, you know so much about Section 8. Why don't you put together a course?" I was like, "Huh." That makes me feel pretty uncomfortable, but I guess if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're not really growing. So I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." So I dove in. I literally put everything I've learned in the past 11 years in real estate into this course. I put a lot of pride and effort, like all my spreadsheets, everything that I use, my tenant application process, like literally everything that I know about real estate, I put into it. And which is out now, section8doneright.com. And when I was thinking about pricing it, like a lot of other people between 3 and 10 grand. And for me, like I thought long and hard about who I was trying to help. And for me, I'm trying to help who I was 10 years ago, right? Like if I had this program 10 years in the past, like where would I be right now? So I thought, I was like, what would I pay for? I was like, I didn't have 3 grand. I wouldn't have put 3 grand in a credit card. I don't want people slamming this on their credit card. So it's $397, which I personally think is very affordable to learn everything that I have in 11 years of real estate because I wanted to get as in many people's hands and as people to see it as possible and help out people. And there's also, like I said, there's a huge need for landlords to understand Section 8 and what it is,
Mhm.
because for me, just like stability, I think is the most important thing in a kid's life and even an adult's life is stability. And I get to provide stability in housing for people that really don't have a ton of other stability. My normal tenant, I would say across my portfolio is a single mom with 1 to 3 kids. So I feel really good that I get to provide stability in housing for those kids so that they know where they're going every day when they get off the school bus. Like they can stay in the same school systems throughout high school and not change schools every year because they're jumping from house to house. So I take a lot of pride in that. And yeah, I make great money, but I'm also providing a great product and I'm a great landlord. And my tenants send me Christmas cards and unfortunately, a lot of other landlords who rent Section 8 can be slumlords. And I never want to become that. And which is why I put the program together. That's why it's called Section 8 Done, because if you do it right, it can be very lucrative and you can help a lot of people.
Hey guys, it's Brenna Carl, CEO and co founder of The Mortgage Shop. When I'm not spending my time searching for the best pizza in town, working out, well, because of pizza, or fighting sharks, as Kale likes to say, I spend my time educating clients on the best investment products that will help them build generational wealth and making sure their loan process is as smooth as warm butter on a piece of toast. Call us today to get started with your investment journey at 800-816-7982 or, to talk more about pizza. Talk to you soon.
That all goes back to that abundance mindset as well. So yeah, I want to dive in and see if you can give us a little bit of a teaser, perhaps, on some of the steps for somebody who is interested in Section 8. And yeah, I'll just hand it over to you from there. So let's blank slate. Somebody who wants to get into Section 8, maybe they're just familiar with, the concept of long-term rentals, right? So where do we go
Yeah.
from?
So the biggest thing, you can really work backwards from your income, which is great because I feel like a lot of investors project out what their rental income is going to be, right? And you can actually go online and find out how much you can get for, say, a 3 bed, 1 bath house in any zip code. So you can go on the HUD website, search, you can just go on Google HUD FMRs 2024. The FMR just stands for fair market rents. And you can go in there and pull it and look up your county or zip codes, and it will tell you how much you get for a studio, a 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, 4 bed, 5 bed. And you can also go to affordablehousing.com, scroll all the way to the bottom and go to Housing Authority, I think it's called. At the bottom is a little link you can click, and you can type in your town, your zip code, and it pulls up all the housing authorities. You can go on their website. You then look at you look for what's called payment standards. So HUD releases fair market rents, and then the housing authority looks at those fair market rents to generally release in October, November. The housing authority looks and says, okay, where do we need to be at for our housing authority to be competitive so that landlords will rent to people with vouchers? And in my market, they're paying anywhere between 110 and like 120% of that fair market rent number. So for a 3-bedroom, if it says 3,000, you're getting 3,600 from one housing. So you're getting anywhere really between, because some programs, there's a lot of different types of vouchers, but some programs pay the fair market rent and some pay 120%. So you have a pretty decent range, say in my market, between 3,000 and 3,600. And then you can work from there and say, okay, can I go find properties just using the 1% rule on Zillow, right? So go on Zillow, 3-bed, 1-bath, $300,000, and just zoom out, put in recently sold past 6 months and see if you see anything. And if you do, okay, then let's start digging a little deeper. If you don't, okay, let's go through all these zip codes and see where in my area this can work. And the reason I got into more multifamily, I'm buying bigger deals. I feel like that's just how you progress as you go through real estate, because the cost per unit number is much lower. Like a single family in my market where I buy now, it's 350, 400 and up, right? It's really hard to find those houses now because of inflation, how fast properties have gone up. But I can buy multifamilies, 3-bedroom units for 250,000 a unit and get $3,600 a month in rent. So like those numbers work great. Whereas a single family has shifted. And if the economy tanks and those numbers change again, I'll start buying more single families. So I just pivoted a little bit. So yeah, that's really how you find to see if your market will work. If single families don't work, start looking at multifamily, small multi, see what they sold for, how many bedrooms, cost per unit, and then compare that to the payment standard in your market. And if it doesn't work, look in a different market, right? Like the Midwest, there's so many high cash flowing markets in the Midwest. You can buy $100,000 house and get $1,800 a month in rent. But you just need to verify demand. And I could talk for 10 hours about this, right? But you need to verify demand. You need to build relationships with the housing authorities. I bring them lunch at least once a year and go in, and they tell me I'm the only one that ever thanks them for doing their job. Like they get yelled at all day long by people. So I go in, I bring them lunch, and they're just so happy. And who do you think they're going to refer people to?
I just want to pause on that for a second, because I think that's awesome, because that's the kind of stuff that 99% of the other people aren't doing, right? And it's that simple little gesture. And you live in Florida, you invest in Massachusetts, so you're not living there locally, but you still make it a point once a year to do this little bit of effort to keep you on the top of their list. And so I just wanted to point that out, because that tiny little thing can make such a huge difference. Like it's that tiny little thing that nobody else is doing.
Yeah. And you get to go in and meet everyone, because so housing workers, I have a property manager now who's doing my new units, and she worked at one of the housing authorities, and she was managing 700 people, 700 tenants she was managing. So like these people are overworked and underpaid, right? Like most government employees. And so just going in there and saying thank you and meeting everybody. And now I know they know me, and I also get to meet their bosses. So if they're not responding in a timely fashion, I know who to email and who to CC on it and say, hey, what's going on with this? And then I get an answer. So it takes time to build those relationships. But once you do, it just goes on cruise control. I email them when I have available units, and they send me people, and I go through my screening process, which the biggest thing I think with Section 8, and it's funny, we're talking offline about this, but a person I know who she has about 60 or 70 units, she told me, like, she heard that I do Section 8. She said, oh, like, I had the worst tenant, like, they trashed the place. And once she got done with that, she's like, but I do have this other tenant that's been with me about 7 or 8 years who's great. And she's on Section 8. And I was like, yeah, like, those are the people you need to find. And you can find these people if you screen tenants properly. Like, a tenant is a bad tenant before they move into your unit. It's your fault for renting to them. Going back to the extreme ownership, if you rent to a bad tenant, you did a bad job. Like in that, I don't know if you're a bad landlord all the time, but in that little span of time, you were a bad landlord because you did not do your research to verify that a great person was going into your unit. And there's good Section 8 tenants, there's bad Section 8 tenants. There's good market tenants, there's bad market tenants, right? Like you need to hone in on your application process to find good people. And I can go over that quick if you want. I don't know how we're doing on time, but
But yeah, we have a little bit left. Yeah, why don't you just quickly run through some key points on that?
yeah. So I've always explained it this way, right? If you list a building and you get 10 applications, right? And you look at those 10 and five of them look good, right? You'll be able to go through the other five, no, right? But the other five, like, oh, like these people, they all look good. And there might be two good out of the 10. And it's your job to find the two. And if you rent to one of the two, they'll live with you forever. You can go up in their rent. They'll be good people. You can eat off the floors. Your life will be extremely easy. Because what takes me the most of the time is when I have to turn a unit and I have to relist the property and then I have to screen tenants and then I have to put somebody in. I have to clean it. I have to deal with that. Right. So if I can avoid that means I can work less, right? Or focus my time on other things. So what I do is I go through, I look at so when I first meet someone, I tell them, if you lie to me about anything on your application, I will not rent to you, period. That is my policy. I've been lied to literally about everything. So do not lie to me. If you're thinking about lying to me, so you don't want me to know something, I'm going to find out. I won't rent to you. So just be honest with me. If you've been evicted, why were you evicted? If you have a bad landlord, why do you have a bad landlord? What is your situation? People make mistakes. You have bad credit. Okay. Like I don't care a ton about credit. If you have 30 credit cards, you're not paying on any of them. Okay. That's a red flag. But if you went to college and then you got pregnant right out of college and the guy left you and you're stuck with two kids and you're not paying your student loans, like I'm not going to fault you for that. So what I care about most are landlord references, and I also do a walkthrough of their existing unit. So with the landlord references, right? I look up who their landlord is. This is probably the thing that they lie the most on because if they have a bad landlord experience, they're not going to give them their number, right? They're going to put their friend on Facebook, their cousin, their brother, whatever. So the first thing I do is I just go on the property lookup on the town website and I see who owns the property, right? If it's in an LLC, I go to the state LLC lookup and I see who owns the property. And it's very simple. It takes you 2 minutes.
Mhm.
If the property's owned in a trust, most likely it says it's going to say who the trustee is on the town website, and it's going to give you the name of the person, right? So you just look, you see who it is. Does it match? Yes or no? If it matches, okay, let's move on. And then you can even skip trace the landlord too. If they give you the phone number and their name, skip trace them. It costs 20 cents. You can go skip trace someone, see if the number, see if the email, see if their contact information. Like you're going to put somebody in your unit and you don't want to spend 20 cents to skip trace the landlord. Come on. Right. Like, think about it. If you like each property is a business. And if you're not running it like a business, you're going to run into problems. Would you hire somebody to run your business off an application and not call anyone and just say, oh, yeah, you look good. Why don't you come in tomorrow and start? Right? It's not how business works. So I see way too many landlords running their properties like that, which is why they'll have a bad Section 8 experience because they'll come in and they'll trash units. They don't do this work. So then I'll look up on Google Maps. I'll look up the property. I'll see if there's any like quirky things about the property. And then I'll call the landlord and I'll say, hi, my name is Mike. I'm calling in regards to XYZ tenant. They say that they're living in your property. Is that correct? They say, yes. I say, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions and might be a little bit funny, but I've been lied to about everything. So I just want to verify you actually are who they say you are. And a lot of times they'll laugh and like, oh, I've never heard that before. And we might get sidetracked on like tenant stories, but if it's actually their landlord. So say, hey, I print out the property record card and I say, how do you own the property? And if it's their brother, sister, cousin, they're gonna be like, oh, in my name? I'm like, oh, what's your name? I'm like, oh, I don't know. And they're gonna hang up on you. When did you buy the property? If it's owned in an LLC, do you have a mortgage? You can look up the mortgage, the deed. You can look up all these things to verify it. And normally after that first question of how you own it, it knocks out people if they're lying because they're gonna have no idea. And I also don't care as much about their existing landlord. I care about the landlord they had previously because he won't lie to me. The landlord they have now, if they're evicting them and they want them out, lie to me about literally everything. So why am I going to put any weight on their opinion? But say I had a tenant who was in a building for 8 years and they're moving because it's being sold or the landlord died or whatever, right? Okay, then I'll talk to the landlord, see what he says. But if somebody was in their past place for a year or two, I want to know who your landlord was before. Like, where'd you live before you lived there? Because whatever he says, I don't care about. And if they won't give me that information, I won't rent to them. I'll say, I need that landlord. And if they're 25 and say, oh, I live with my mom, okay, then you got to kind of pivot a little bit and put weight on different things. I also ask right on my rental application, and this is the biggest thing, like nobody does this. Like going back to 99.9% of people won't bring food to a housing authority. 99.999% of people will not do inspections of the tenant's existing property where they live. Why? Because it takes time out of their day and people are inherently lazy, right? And they don't want to do it. So, but I have right on my rent application, we do an inspection of existing property. Is this okay with you? Yes or no? Below that, I say, we also ask for a copy of your most recent utility payment. Are you okay with this? Yes or no? So the first one, why do I want to do an inspection at their property? Because how they live in that unit is going to be how they live in your unit. If another two things that people lie about their applications on the most are with Section 8 is one, having a boyfriend, right? That isn't on their voucher. I tell people straight up, if you have a boyfriend who's on your voucher, tell me. I want to know who they are. I want to do a credit and background check. I need to know who's living in my property. Like, I'm not going to narc you out to the housing authority. I just need to know. And when you go do a property inspection, oh, and the other thing at dogs, right? Like, oh yeah, I have a dog. It's a small mixed breed. And it's like, okay. And then you get there and they have a kennel full of pit bulls. And it's like, okay, clearly you lied to me about renting to you. And without doing a property inspection, you're never going to know this. If you're walking through their unit in men's work boots, size 13, like that's not their kids' work boots, right? If you go in their, like if you go into their room and there's like men's clothes, and like they have a boyfriend, they're lying to you. And that's why I just tell people straight up, don't lie, I'll find out. And that's my policy. And if you run through all of these things to rent your units out, you'll have tenants that say 10 years that keep your property looking good. Like, I'm not saying you won't get fooled and you won't get a bad tenant. Yeah, anything's possible, but you're giving yourself such a better opportunity to get a good person who's going to stay in your unit, hopefully for their whole life.
Yeah. Now, do you do those walkthroughs in person or do you do them remotely now? Or how does that work?
Yeah. So I used to do them in person. When I first moved to Florida, before I had the property manager, I would do FaceTime with them, and I'd go through our application and I'd call them, ask them any questions. And then I'd say, hey, do you have time? Are you home? And if they said no, say, oh, when are you going to be home? Oh, and I'm just picking my son up from school, be home in 10 minutes. Okay, cool. I'm going to FaceTime with you. So you just can walk me around your apartment now. Is that okay? And if they say no, okay, like, why are you saying no? Right? You should say, yeah, sure. No problem. It's a little messy. I haven't done the dishes. Perfectly fine. I'm not looking at stuff like that. I just want to check things out, see how you live. Just make sure you're not lying about anything on your application. And if you don't rent to somebody because they're Buddhist and they have a thing, that's discrimination, right? But I'm just looking at, how do you live? Oh, you said you have a dog. Oh, show me the dog. Oh, he's so cute, right? It's simple stuff, you know. So and now I have my property manager, and it's really cool. I was able to take my brother on full time as my maintenance manager now. I'll have him or my property manager do it for me now. And that's just like a non-negotiable. They have to send me a video or I'm not allowing them to move into my unit. And going back to, I know I mentioned the utilities. So as a landlord, the utilities for your property are going to be in your name, right? If a tenant moves in, they have to call to take it out of your name. And if they're not paying their utility bills at their prior residence for 3 months, they're not going to be able to put utilities at your property in their name. So that's why I also ask for a copy of the most recent utility bill, because if they're paying the utilities, it means they can put it in their name when they move in, and they're at least paying that bill that you can verify.
Okay. That's good. Like it's a lot more work than most people put in for getting a tenant. But, and that it's really not even in relation to it being Section 8. Frankly, these are probably just good practices for anybody renting a long-term rental to put into practice, to weed out and prevent the horror stories that you hear so many times. But you can't say that because it's Section 8, it requires really more work. Like I said, I think it's probably good practice for anybody to do. But again, it's these types of things that people don't want to put in the extra effort to do. But doing those things, like you mentioned, you can now go from the average tenant lifespan of whatever, I think you said was like 2 or 3 years for market to 8 to 9 years for Section 8, and reducing that amount of turnover, reducing that cost of the turnover. And frankly, it's putting in the time now or putting it in later, right? Because if you don't put in the time now, you get a bad tenant, or even if you have an okay tenant, and again, 2-3 years later, they move out, you're turning that unit. And then 2-3 years later, you're turning that unit. 2-3 years later, you're turning that unit. Over that 8-9 year lifespan, you probably spent a lot more money and a lot more time than doing what you just outlined, doing it up front and getting yourself set up for success. And just share with our audience what your average profit per unit or cash flow per unit is. And this is what, when you told me about this initially, this is what blew my mind, because I'm in the short-term rental world, and we like to tout our flag of we cash flow more than any other type of real estate, and long-term rentals, they only cash flow $100, $200 a month. And you told me this, and I was like, holy cow. So why don't you share
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. You took the words right out of my mouth when you were saying about putting the time in. It's like how, if you're going to rent to three different people, turn the unit three times, everything I just talked about takes the application process takes me like 10 minutes, right?
Mm.
Driving their unit. Yeah, that's going to take some time, but you're not going to put an hour in to verify someone's a good tenant that's going to live with you for 10 years, like 9 years. Yeah. But it just fires me up every time I talk about it. Cause it's like just the way people think it is like, oh, I don't have time to do that, but I'll turn the unit over the next 10 years because they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel and they're playing the short game, not the long game. But yeah. So right now I won't buy a deal unless it cash flows $1,000 a month a unit. So like I just bought an 8 unit property, town Weymouth, and I'm making a little less on that one, but I'm master leasing the entire building to an organization that's paying me 100% of the rent, direct deposit every single month. I don't have a property manager. I have zero vacancies. They fill all the units. It's that property. I will literally probably work an hour or two the entire year on that property doing tax stuff.
Right.
And they will have my brother's phone number if there's ever any maintenance issues. So he'll just go handle it. It's literally, I'm buying this property. I do have to turn existing units, which is going to be some work. But once those units are turned, I'm going to cash flow about almost $900 a month a unit. And the best, like one of the best things about renting this way is that so this organization pays me based off the fair market rents that HUD releases every single year. And you can go on the HUD website and see how much rents have grown. You can look up all the way down. You can go to 2015 and see what rents were, and you can see what they are now. I'm not saying rents are always going to go up. You would think rents go up over time if they stay flat, if they go down. I just don't do a rent increase and I get the same amount of money, right? With no vacancy. So next year, like going to the 2025, if rents go up $200, which is what they've been going, year over year, they've been going up an average $200. That's $200 times 8 units. And I literally have to send them an email to go up on rent on all the units. No one's going to move. And I believe that this agency's 30 days. It's normally between 30 and 60 days, depending on the housing authority and the organization for rent increase. But as long as I can raise my rents to the fair market rent, I can't go over it, but I can raise it to it. So why wouldn't I do that? If I'm going to have no vacancy, my tenants aren't going to move, I'm still going to be a good landlord. They're still going to have a great product. Like, so I can go up my rents every single year with no tenant turnover.
Yeah. No, that's why I think this is such an awesome niche. Gosh, just think about all the whining and crying there is in the market of can't find deals, long-term doesn't work, multifamily doesn't work. And here you are, $900,000 a month per unit with what sounds like relatively minimal work once everything's set up and tenants are in place. That sounds pretty darn good to me.
Yeah. And like last year, right? Like I rent another 2-family to this organization and they direct deposit every single month on the first. It's in my account. And I'm just looking up on my board right now. I get 5,200 for a 2-family. It's a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom. So to all together, I'm getting 5,204. Last year, I was getting 4,700, and I literally sent them an email, and now I'm making
Or a dollar increase.
yeah, and for nothing. I literally sent an email, right? So, and I have a net worth calculator too that has all my properties listed. It has my mortgages when they get paid off, how much equity I have each month because I tied it into mortgage pay down. So I can actually track like my equity and it also tracks my cash flow. And I send it all the banks when I get mortgages and stuff. But it's just so amazing at the end of every year when I actually love doing my taxes, which is crazy, but I love going through because I don't look at it like I don't do anything crazy from like an accounting standpoint. And see, the end of the year, I'll go through all my properties and then I'll put in all my new rents. And I'm just like, holy cow, like I'm cash flowing an extra $5,000 this year because I sent some emails. And not every organization's like some housing authorities, you actually have to fill out a piece of paper and have your tenant sign it. And I'll send it to them to DocuSign. And I'll just text them, say, hey, I'm going up in your rent. Your tenant portion of rent shouldn't change. So I'm not going above the payment standard. Can you please get this to me as soon as possible? Thank you. You try to take all the excuses out of it, right? They literally have to click on an email on their phone, click sign, and then it gets emailed to me. And if they don't get it back to me right away, I'll text them again the next day. Hey, just checking in on the rent increase. And they get it back to me in a couple days latest. And I forward it to the housing authorities. In between 30 and 60 days later, I get a rent increase.
Yeah.
So
Again, I think that's an awesome strategy to me. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but is there it sounds like there's not. Is there a lot of competition in terms of getting the Section 8 tenants, or I don't, do you find it easier to find deals because you have a more predictable revenue that you can estimate with? I guess what I'm trying to ask is because multifamilies, there's a lot of challenges in multifamily right now, and there's a very competitive market. Short-term rentals, very competitive market. Self-storage, very competitive market. All these different types of real estate assets, very competitive. It's, again, to me, it seems like this is under the radar. Is it a very competitive, or do you find it easier to find deals to get
It's
things?
Yeah, it's way less competitive than renting to my, because like I said, I get so many emails from tenants who say, "You're the only landlord that told me they accept Section 8." And it's actually discrimination if you say that
Right.
you don't accept a Section 8 voucher. In a couple states, it's actually legal to discriminate based on the voucher, but in most states, it's illegal. So it's just crazy. And not a lot of people know how to look up the payment standards and understand it. And it's so simple. It's like, oh, well, Section 8 is extra paperwork. Because when you lease out to a tenant, you have to fill out moving paperwork. And it's 3 pages that you fill out, like their name, rent. You have to fill like a lead paint disclosure, and you just send it to them. And then you get back a housing assistance payment contract. And that contract it's between me, the housing authority, and the tenant. So it's like a three-way contract. So not only do I have my lease, but I also have a contract through the housing authority that the tenant knows they need to meet and not mess up, or they'll lose their voucher. So another thing is too, so in my market, so getting a housing choice voucher, say that I wanted to get one today, or someone listening wants to get one. You go onto the housing authority website and you apply to get a voucher. In my market, it takes 8 to 11 years to get a voucher.
Holy
So
cow.
if you signed up today, it would take you 8 to 11 years before they call you and say, "Hi, we have a voucher ready for you."
Wow.
So like legit think, if you're applying for a voucher, what's that? It says that you can't afford to live and you need help. And then the government agency is saying, "Oh yeah, we know you need help, but just wait 8 to 11 years and we'll help you out then." It's what? Like how, like that is insane. So it's crazy to me that this is going sideways, but we're spending all this money. Sorry, my dog's barking. We're spending all of this money overseas, like in all these other places, when people in our own country need help and we're ignoring them. It's so blatantly obvious. Going back, I almost forget what your original question was. But oh, competition, right? So I bought 18 units last November, and it was through a broker that I had no idea who they were. I've never worked with them before. And in the commercial world, brokers call landlords like myself all day long. They try to build a relationship because when I want to sell one day, if I ever want to sell, I would call the broker I had the best relationship with and say, "Hey, I want you to list my properties." And they make the full 4 or 5%. They don't co-broke. They don't split commissions in the commercial world. They send it out to their email list to people they know that can perform, and that's how you get deals. So this broker called me out of the blue and said, "Hi, we have 18 units in Plymouth where I invest. Are you interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. Send me." Like, "All right, you got to sign an NDA." So what that told me was that they sent that out to all their investors on their list, and no one wanted this deal because why would they call me? They don't have a relationship with me. So they sent it over to me, and I saw 17 of the 18 units had Section 8 tenants in place. So for me, I'm like, hell yeah, that's perfect. And so again, like I would, if those are all market tenants in there, I would have never even saw that deal because so many investors were like, "Oh, I want that deal," or whatever. But no one wanted because they're Section 8 tenants. I went up on rents almost $1,000 per unit on 17 of the 18 tenants in 90 days.
Same.
Like I have it on a separate sheet, but like the NOI and it appraised for $1 million more than I bought it for. I bought it for 4.6 million. I brought investors in for the 1.2, but I own 51, they own 49. So it was the first time I've ever brought in investors in any of my deals. But the NOI was like 350, and now it's like five something. Like I don't want to say that I don't have it in front of me, but it's like in 90 days, right? Like where else? So I added over $2 million in value to appraise at a 6.8 cap. I had over $2 million in value in 90 days by sending in rent increase letters to the housing authority. And this landlord hadn't sent in rent increase letters for 5 years because he owned the properties outright, didn't care, was on cruise control. And like,
You didn't take your course.
exactly. Like, I don't even want him knowing about it. But these are the type of deals you can find. And don't get me wrong, like some of the tenants that are in there, a couple of them are a little rough that we're going to have to transition. But as you go through transitioning, you're still getting paid the housing authority portion of rent, even if the tenant doesn't pay. So if you have to evict them and not paying you rent, the housing authority is still paying their portion the entire time. So if you're getting $3,000 a month for rent and the tenant's paying you $400, you're still getting $3,600 a month in rent. Whereas if you rent to a market tenant who's not paying, you're getting zero. And in
Yeah.
Massachusetts, it takes up to six months to 12 months to get somebody out. So
Wow. Yeah. Just so many seeming benefits to this. I want to encourage our audience to take a real close listen to this and broaden your horizons a little bit, because again, as everything else seems to get more and more competitive, the numbers seem to get tighter. If you're willing to look, think outside the box, and maybe put in a little bit more upfront work, man, you got some really lucrative niches out there like this. I think it's awesome, Mike. Thanks for sharing all this and sharing your knowledge and your experience. Like I said already before, and you shared this stuff with me before, I was blown away. I was like, holy cow, this sounds amazing. So why don't you just share one more time, where can people find your course, and where can people find you if they want to learn more about Section 8 done right?
yeah, so on Facebook and Instagram, Section 8 done 8 is the number 8. And also, sorry, I should put my phone on silent here. And also, if section8doneright.com is a course. So go on there, check it out. I have a ton of information on there. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and Facebook if you have questions. And again, the course is $397. And if you take it and you think it was trash, email me. I'll send you all your money back. Like, you're going to learn so much from it. And I'm that confident. So yeah. And there's also a community that goes along with it. It's free for the first month, $97 a month after. You can ask me questions if you're going through a market or whatever. You can cancel anytime, or you can just not be in the community at all. So completely up to you.
Awesome. And before we sign off, we'd like to ask our guests for 3 actionable or practical tips for our audience based on what we discussed.
Yeah. So if you're looking to get into real estate, look up the real estate meetups immediately and just go to them. And for me, it was so beneficial in the growth, just networking with people who are like-minded. And don't be nervous if you don't know anything about real estate. Like, people there will help you. Generally, 99% of the people there are good people. You'll get someone who's not good once in a while, so be careful. But I would start going there, start reading books if you want to get into real estate. And there's so much information online you can find. From a personal growth standpoint, just having goals. Like, my goals are literally right there above my computer. And I break them down. I have 1 year to 4 year goals up there. And I look at them every single day. And it's so important because I had that above my computer in Massachusetts. And my 5-year goal was to move to Jupiter, Florida. And I'm literally sitting in my office in Jupiter, Florida right now, living 100% off my real estate. So it might sound corny to put goals together and print out pictures, but it works when you're looking at it every day and it's top of mind. And I guess my last one was just, don't make excuses, right? Like, you either do or you don't. And if you want to do something, just get out there and do it. Take it one day at a time. Nothing happens overnight. It took me 11 years to get to where I am right now. And just put your head down and work hard every day and you'll get there.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. Thanks again, Mike. And ladies and gentlemen, take a look, check out his course. It's really great stuff. So thank you again. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for another episode of The Fit Investor.